following the midterms, AOC has criticized the Democratic Party establishment in New York for their failures. So here's the heart of the issue. Look at this headline. If Democrats lose the House, they may have New York to blame. So here's AOC's tweet to explain why. New York State Dem Party leadership, which was gutted under Cuomo, stuffed with lobbyists who work to boost the GOP, and failed to pass a basic state ballot measure to protect New York redistricting, must be accountable. I called for Jay Jacobs' resignation a year ago, and I still hold that position. Jacobs is the New York State Democratic Party chair, and AOC called for his resignation last year after he refused to endorse progressive India Walton, who was running for mayor over in Buffalo, then compared it to having to endorse David Duke of the KKK. I don't know if you remember this story, but after she won her primary for mayor, he was like, well, I'm not gonna endorse her if David Duke wins the primary election. I'm not gonna endorse him, which is an insane comparison given that India Walton is a black woman, a Democrat and a progressive who won her primary contest for mayor in a city that is sometimes voting conservatively. This is a situation where the party chair should be involved. So she's not only calling out the redistricting failures. Here's progressive New York Assemblyman Zohran Monmandi breaking it down. So let's watch that.
Had a ballot measure, which if passed would have ensured that we could have had a more favorable map for Democratic congressional races going into this election. And that ballot measure was opposed by the state Republican Party to the tune of $3 million and an entire statewide tour. Yet meanwhile, the Democratic Party headed by Jay Jacobs spent $0 on supporting that ballot measure. And as is no surprise to any of us because of the disparity in spending and effort, that ballot measure lost. And the loss of that ballot measure was then used as a pretext in the court cases that occurred afterwards to ensure that we had state-drawn maps, maps which were then far more favorable to Republicans, and maps which may be part of the reason why we do not hold the House.
So that's huge. I mean, gerrymandering's a huge problem in the United States, all around the country. Los Angeles was just in a huge scandal where members of the city council were drawing their own districts, talking about how they could get the most assets in their districts, and talking about black voters as if they needed to dilute black power in their districts and ensure that they keep power and keep their seats at the expense of voters living in the communities in Los Angeles. This happens all over the country, all of the time. And we've got to do something about gerrymandering, but the Democratic Party in New York didn't see this as a priority. And we know that in the primary, we had districts redrawn a few times, and we saw progressive candidates get pushed out of their districts, put in situations where they would be forced to run against each other, which is a bad situation. But the Democratic Party's priorities and the leadership of the Democratic Party in New York is hurting Democratic Party power. They're fighting against progressives harder than they're fighting against Republicans who want to cut up the state to make sure that they hold power. Jackson, I want to bring you in here before we get into more details.
Well, at the end of the day, politics, and especially in a state like New York and in a midterm election this important, politics is a professional game, and losses and failed strategies shouldn't be protected for the sake of a few people's immunity from deserved consequence. So if people are up in arms about this, a lot of centrists, they'll be like, oh, progressives are just, but y'all didn't do well. So, again, I think that's an easy pushback to it. It's like, what, y'all want us to keep y'all in business for losing for us? So, again, y'all lost and y'all need to be replaced.
Yeah, that couldn't be more true. And let's keep in mind that Republicans don't care about morals when it comes to gerrymandering. The Democrats might say, we're not gonna get involved with this game. We're not gonna get involved with this ballot measure. Meanwhile, Republicans are gerrymandering districts to maintain power at the expense of popular voters' will. So in Wisconsin this year, the numbers are especially insane. Democrat Tony Evers won the governor's race by nearly 3.5 points. Republicans are projected to win a 2/3 majority in the state Senate and come just short of similar margins in the state assembly, which would have allowed them to override Evers' vetoes because of the rigged maps they passed in 2021. At the same time, The Supreme Court is set to decide on a case that would make gerrymandering even easier for Republicans, especially when it comes to racialized gerrymandering. So the case is called Merrill versus Milligan, and here's just a quick overview of what that case is looking at. So Alabama drew a racist redistricting map. 2 Trump-appointed judges struck it down because it's racist. It's clearly drawn to dilute black votes and cut black neighborhoods into a number of specific different districts in the state, so that they will never get to the point where they have their own district and can actually elect someone to power. Instead, they're all sliced up into other districts. So 2 weeks later, the Supreme Court reinstates the racist map, and now SCOTUS may decide to legalize racist gerrymandering. So, is the New York State Democratic Party approach to just draw fairer maps just one-sided disarmament? Like, do we need to be playing the same game the Republicans are playing in order to maintain power and fight for power? I don't know. That's a tough question. It seems that if this is how the game needs to be played, that's what the party should do in order to win. Like, this is how it's set up, especially if the Supreme Court decides to vote to legalize racist gerrymandering, to disenfranchise voters across the country, voters of color, especially black voters in the South in states like Alabama. Jackson?
Well, whether it be the Democrats' failure to address districting or anything like that, at the end of the day, Democrats also failed to address many of the important issues within, especially New York City, where crime is on the rise, and they let Republicans raise that issue without offering any real solutions. So at the same time, Democrats didn't deliver in key ways or address the issues in ways that they should have, which also would have impacted the vote.